Have fun plans for the outdoors? Make the memories last with the best outdoor coolers and drinkware. Celebrating 10 years of cool, Orca was founded in 2012, born from the idea of making a hard-sided cooler that beat out all the rest. Orca coolers are built to be as strong as the adventures you take them on. That's why they have a lifetime warranty while giving you world-class maximum temperature retention. Orca's drinkware offers the same high quality, keeping your drinks icy cold or hot for hours, and they look great while doing it. Their stainless steel, vacuum-sealed tumblers and martini cup are perfect companions for your next outdoor adventure. Go to orcacoolers.com/bourbon for 15% off your order. That's orcacoolers.com/bourbon for 15% off. Orca, make it last. Today's show is also sponsored by our friends at distilleryproducts.com. If you are a store, you're a group, you're a blog, you're a podcast, you're a distillery, whatever it is, you need laser edge glassware at wholesale prices. Reach out to me. I'd be happy to get you in touch with the whole family behind distilleryproducts.com doing amazing things. We use them. You should too at distilleryproducts.com. Hey, y'all, I want to let you know we've teamed up with our friends at pickshop.com. They have an app, the Picks app. It is a new awesome thing that we're moving a lot of our stuff to. We're moving tastings there. We're moving posts there. We're not going to leave Instagram and Facebook and all the other places, but Picks is this really cool thing that we're getting to build with them. We're getting to build how you post. We're getting to build how you go ahead and put in a tasting. And these tastings will match you up to other people and other whiskeys that you are very compatible with based off of what you've put in for your tastings. There's so much stuff. I can't even tell you enough in a minute, but go to pickshop.com, hit the link, get the app, get in there, start tasting, start posting, be a part of the community. We're going to be there. You should be there too. Go to pickshop.com and get the app. Hello, everyone. My name is John Edwards. Zeke Baker is on assignment, but together we make the Dad's Drinking Bourbon. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, thank you for making us part of your day. It is a very special day. We have a very special guest because Zeke and I are dumb. When we're dumb, we go to the experts to tell us about the things that we're dumb about. We're very upfront about this. Y'all know it. We're not the sharpest crayon in the box. And that's why we're going to Gareth Moore from Virginia Distillery. He is going to explain to us, you might have heard out there right now, TTB has their initial definition of what an American single malt is. But for those of us that drink whiskey that is not malted, maybe it has a little bit of malt, maybe it's got some high malt, but not like a single malt. Some of you might drink Scotch. Some of you might drink Irish whiskey. Americans do it too. That's why we're going to Gareth to tell us what the hell an American single malt is, as well as learn about Virginia Distillery and all the stuff they have going on there. They have some finishes. They just released a bourbon finish on the American single malt, a cuvee, and a sherry. So without further ado, our friend Gareth Moore, thank you. You are the CEO of Virginia Distillery. Welcome to Dad's Drinking Bourbon.
Excellent. Thank you, John. Appreciate you having me around, and sounds like it's going to be fun.
It is going to be a blast. And let's just start off with, what is American Single Malt? Let's get right to it. I could ask you how you are. We've been talking for a good 45 minutes, so I mean that could just stay between us.
I'm doing well. Yeah, no, that's it. But we'll just leave it at that. But what is American Single Malt? American Single Malt, before I go into the definition, I'd just like to think about it as it's something that Americans didn't invent, right? Single malt in general was invented by the Scots, by the Irish, by the folks in Japan. We didn't come up with this definition of having, a whiskey that's only made from one grain, that's one distillery, that's, having all these other definitions. It was overseas that definition came up. And so when we think about American Single Malt, we're thinking about something that has already been made, has already been defined, but we're doing it here in the U.S. And that might sound like, okay, great, we're just copying someone else. But I like to think that that's part of a very long tradition in the U.S. of not copying, something overseas, not taking something that's, from the old world and trying to bring it to the new world and just copy it. right? We're trying to make it better. We're trying to make it our own. And, whether you're thinking about pizza, or you're thinking about hamburgers, or something more recent like a sushi or something like that, right? We don't just copy what's going on overseas. We make it our own. And I like to use the sushi example because it's not something that we copy exactly. Imagine if you had like a Philadelphia roll and try to sell that in Tokyo, you'd have a hard time. But we like cream cheese here, and makes it our own. And that's the same thing that we're trying to do with American Single Malt.
I kind of feel like some of the stuff they did with the American Single Malt is they took the definition internationally of kind of what's a single malt, and then they added some of the stuff from bourbon just to kind of make it American, like the 160 proof or less. What are things that are distinctly American? It's like, all right, your proof has to be over 80 and it has to be less than 160. And it's like, that's the sweet spot of where we want it to be. Certain things, I feel like it was an overlay when you say make it better. And I know I'm tipping my hand that I'm smarter than I let on about this, but
it's exactly what you said, right? We're trying to move it into the American system. And with some of those things like, 700 liters for a cask, or, 160 proof, those aren't things that we pulled from Scotland or Ireland or Japan. We pulled those just from the TTB's existing definitions. And we were trying to figure out, how do we get something that's within the American definition of whiskey, right? The existing different layers of how they define whiskey, not the subcategories of, bourbon or rye or anything else, but something that we're not kind of kowtowing to what they say in Scotland, and it has to be 3 years and it has to be used oak, but we're going under the American definitions. And that's what Americans have always done. And that's what we're trying to do is not just say, hey, Scotland defined it exactly for us, but the essence of it, it has to be one distillery. Malt means 100% barley. That's what we're going for.
And what do you think the biggest difference for people that understand, right? There's a Highland, a Lowland, a Speyside, and Islay. Everything has a different type of flavor. Islay is where all the people that taste Scotch and go, I hate it. It tastes like a Band-Aid. Chances are that is from Islay and is not necessarily indicative of all the other places in Scotland. But why is it that American single malts don't have that acetone side to it that some of the Scotches do, where you immediately have a turnoff if your palate does not agree with that? But I feel like American single malt is a much more approachable barley drink than Scotch can be sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, it's to each their own. But I mean, the way I think about it is that if you're looking at Scotland, obviously there are these very defined regions of different styles that you're getting from Islay or Speyside, Highland, Campbelltown, Lowlands, all this stuff. But if you look at the U.S., we are a hell of a lot bigger, right, than you are in Scotland, and our climates are a heck of a lot more extreme. Both, in any given region, hot summers, cold winters, to how dry it gets, how wet it gets, how hot it gets. And, those very different climate extremes mean that we have different maturation environments that are going to make any given distillery across the country very, very different than the next, as compared to Scotland, where they're all kind of, similar next to each other.
Anything else we need to know about American? I mean, I feel like this is the intro to the rest of the show. This is the intro to what the hell is American single malt. So now we could go talk about Virginia Distillery, but anything else we need to know about the category before we get started?
I think the number one thing to know about the category is that it's kind of a sleeping giant. There are tons of producers out there. There's 100-odd distilleries, 200 plus different products out there that are American single malts, and people generally don't know about them. They're generally from craft producers, but they're really interesting. There's a huge variety of them, and I think there's a sleeping giant with this new announcement by the TTB that people are going to know about pretty soon.
It has been a running joke, and I feel bad for saying it, but it was constantly anybody who produced American single malt was like, it's coming. Start investing in American single malt now. I'll invest. I'm not going to necessarily invest in the bottles, because the bottles are just going to get better over time once the TTB actually defines what it is. And these craft distillers have more than 3 years to whip something together. You know, it's fun to taste the bottles now, but I don't think like those bottles are going to be worth, you know, what certain people that might do whiskey valuations think that they're going to be worth at the end of the day, but they're good. And I really think that it was a great category. I just didn't know if it was ever going to be, you know, like if Americans were ever going to catch on.
You know, I mean, you're right in that there's not like kind of a defining moment of like when we're going up against like the champs of single malts with the Scots, right? But you know, I always like to be reminded of what was it, Chateau Montelaine, the Judgment of Paris, right? Where you had these, you know, yahoos from California making white wines that you know, these guys in France, you know, thought were a joke, but in a blind tasting, suddenly they made a great movie about it, right? Suddenly it's like, oh wow, these compete with the best of what we thought were the best of being these, you know, old world French wines. And we haven't had one quite yet in the American single malt category that's taken on one of the Scots, but I think we're really, really close. And I think it's a moment like that is going to really put not just, you know, whatever distillery is able to do that, but the entire category on the map.
I think that is a fair point, and I can't wait until that happens. And moving on, tell us a little bit about yourself. You graduated from Boston College. Funny enough, I said I wouldn't tell you about me. I did not tell you this fact. I wanted to go to BC. The only reason I didn't is because your housing was not guaranteed for 4 years. So that was the only reason. Right. And I was like, I don't want to pay for an apartment.
I got tripled my my freshman year. It was miserable. It was much smaller than this office, and there were 3 of us, and we had to live there. It was the worst. Yeah,
the housing situation in Chestnut Hill was not a great place to be. So it was like, I would love to go to BC. Probably not in the cards. You got an MBA from Georgetown. You are the president of the Virginia Distillers Association. You're on Discus Craft Advisory Council. What don't you do?
I'm very bad at doing the dishes. I'm not going to clean up after myself. Sometimes I don't help enough with bath time. These are just the complaints I heard in the last 2 or 3 hours.
The kids have a complaint box.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that's what I don't do.
But you do a lot of other stuff. Just an amazing resume. What even got you into whiskey in the first place?
It's a long, complicated story, like most things, but I do a lot of different things. Just like my late father, I like to think that, you know, idle hands. You know, you keep busy, you keep out of trouble. Just be productive. But yeah, so let's see. It goes back to 2011. My father, he was a Irish immigrant, came over in 72, scholarship kid. Mom came over in 76, and dad lived out the American dream that is still very, very much alive. He was a tech guy, got a bunch of degrees, and then started tech companies and had a few of them. 2011, he sold his primary operating company, did very well for himself, and decided that, well, he was only 61, 62, but decided that he wanted to start the next great American whiskey company. Despite being Irish, of course, the marketing people would love if he was Scottish or if we made an Irish whiskey, but he was an Irish guy that liked Scottish style single malts, and he decided to go after it. Dad, he wasn't a terribly big guy. He was a lot smaller than me, but he liked to think really big. The distillery system, the stills, the tanks, and everything that he bought were pretty big. In retrospect, started building the distillery in 2011. About 18 months into it, took a heart attack and passed. And as I like to say, at that time, I was very, 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 very naive about the industry. Now I'm just very, very naive. I dropped one of the varies, and was like, okay, great whiskey, great work, Dad. Like, I'm going to keep doing this. This is going to be easy and fun and like a party. And then like the narrator comes in. It was not a party. It took a long time. We kept on going. Let's see, about another 18 months after Dad passed, we got the distillery actually operational, started making whiskey, got our visitor center, started that time. We started a brand we called VHW. I'm contractually obligated not to tell you what the H stands for. That means you have to Google it. We got a little tiff with the SWA. But we built that product, which was a blend of a Scottish single malt we imported, plus our own younger distillate we put in port casks. We sold that from 2015 on to 2020, and that's when we launched our American Single Malt that we have been aging since 2015, and we call that Courage and Conviction. As everybody knows, if you want to launch a brand that you've been working on for 5 years, you want to time it perfectly to coincide with the onset of a global pandemic, which we did perfectly. We timed it for April of 2020. It was very scary. It was, I was freaked out at the front end. It was like, oh my God, I'm spending like the last 5 years on building this, and now it's a pandemic. It's good to be Irish. Better to be lucky than smart. You know, people were able to, I guess, learn about the product, discovery brands as people were staying home, and we were able to be part of a lot of things that were happening during the pandemic. And people learned about us. We got a little bit of wind in our sails, and we've been doing well ever since. So that's the story.
I really think the pandemic was was what you made of it. And I'm not saying anything bad about the like, this is not a commentary on COVID in general. It's more just, people were staying home, and it was, do you want to reach out to them? And do you want to go live? Do you want to, like, what are you doing? It then became, is your social media active? Are you getting your whiskey in front of the right people and having them talk about it? And I hate that influencer word. I really do, because I feel like influencer for the whiskey space is just give me free stuff instead of like it is somebody who is asking you for something free. Like when your team reached out and said we were going to do this podcast, it was like, would you like a bottle or would you like the sample pack that has 3 2-ounce samples? I'm like, I would rather have the 3 2-ounce samples, because I'd rather try your whole portfolio. And we famously, when people reach out, we're like, listen, like if you're doing a podcast with us, don't feel like you have to send us a bottle.
You should have gone for the bottle, because we wrap the bottles in like $50 bills. It's just like this entire like tax evasion scandal. That's it's a good strategy.
But I think that's like every bad story. I say that I found $20, and then all of a sudden your story's better. But I also feel like, knowing people in the industry and being friends with people in the industry, I'm like, you could take a 750 and you could split that up. If you're just giving out 2-ounce samples to everyone, like, you can split that up and have more people taste it and more people talk about it. And it's going to go
sitting on somebody's shelf where they might have smelled it one time, and if they even opened it.
And I took a picture on Instagram. Hooray. Like, Instagram is suppressing all alcohol content right now anyway. So like, what's it matter?
Well, was there like a lovely back deck and like maybe a fall scene, or maybe do you have a creek in your backyard? Because that makes the whiskey taste better.
Well, stickers definitely make the whiskey taste better. Any aftermarket stickers on a single barrel, and that like immediately tastes better.
Yes. That's how you make your laptop actually runs faster if you put that on the back, and it gets rid of malware.
You heard that from your dad, who
That's true.
Did tech companies. Absolutely.
Oh, that was one of the things he said, always have the courage of your convictions and use free stickers to get rid of malware. So those were the two things. That's what we grew up with.
But I also think, going back to it, right? You all did a very good job of the people that were in that space. And there were plenty of, I hate using the word influencer again, but there were like the Scotch influencers within. Y'all have finally started to like talk to some people that were posting about bourbon, but you very quickly went to the people like my buddy Nate, who was Single Malt Daily at the time. Now he's just back to Nate Ghana. My friend Brandon, the Daily Dram, like those folks that were actually like, I think, Single Malt savvy, all those folks that are out there on Instagram and they're posting about Scotch. You were like, hey, do you want to try something else? And, my buddy Brett, my late friend Brett, was a huge fan of Virginia Distillery. He talked about it all the time. He's like, you got to try this
Brett's
stuff.
had some drinks in this room here. Yeah.
We have a great podcast with Brett where all we did. Do you know Denver from Denver and Liley? Have you met him yet?
I've not met him, no.
We had a crazy day. They went up to Kentucky for a little bit and picked a barrel at Russell's, and then came down, and we went to Zeke's house and we did this podcast. and it was actually so long I split it up into two, and we did nothing. Like, we didn't talk about whiskey until I think 30 minutes left in the second one. Like, half of the podcast was on who shot first, Han or and like
I remember the first time meeting Brett. It was very. I was in New York and I had to make it down to Charlottesville, and I remember talking with like a friend up there. I was like, I got to make it down there. Like, Scotch Troopers down there. You didn't call him Brett, right?
Yeah.
The Scotch Troopers there. And I was like, wait, what the fuck? Like, what who do you have to meet? I got to meet Scotch Trooper. It's very important. And I just had it like in my mind because I hadn't met him. And to be honest, I hadn't learned a lot about him. And it's like, I had this preconceived notion in my mind. And imagine like, if you didn't know anything about the industry and you just heard you got to meet this guy, Scotch Trooper, right? He's coming to Charlottesville. You'd be like, great, right? Like some guy, you know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
And it was high pressure, and I think I called him Sir the first time I met him, and then it's like 3 minutes into it, and you're like, man, this guy's just like a guy. Right? Like, he's just like a normal human, like amazing, like kind person. And it takes him a long time to be like, hey, we should probably talk about whiskey. Yeah. If we have to talk about whiskey, Brett, we can talk about it. But, just would love to just talk with him as a person.
Funny enough, and this is for the people that are real OGs on Instagram, like Instagram wise. I feel like a lot of accounts popped up during pandemic and all that because people were bored and they're like, let me start an Instagram account. So for us that have been around, since 2016 on Instagram, active and all that, like Brett was the first person who, number one, like he had 60 something thousand followers when other people have triple digits. But like back then, whiskey accounts did not. And he also had the blue check mark, which like hardly any whiskey influencer accounts had. And so I remember the first time like we started interacting and I was like, oh my God, this is this verified person who's like trying to talk to me. Let's go. And it was before we had our following and we were, working our way up, and it was at a time where I don't think you can do it. It helped that he was one of the best people you'd ever meet, like just one of the nicest down to earth people you'd ever meet. But it all started during a time where like Instagram was still didn't have the algorithm it has now. It didn't have reels. It didn't have all that crap. And it was like somebody, when they built up that following, you were like, oh my God, it's Scotch Trooper. And then you meet him and you're like, oh.
And then in that entire market, I mean, there were people that, I guess were jealous of his success. I mean, there were people that, didn't give him the respect as one of those, leaders in a lot of big things. And but God love him. I love that guy.
Miss that guy very much. But you going back to everything, you did find the right people to kind of get your whiskey in the hands of. Back in that time, was that the VHW that you were giving out to everyone, or was that? Yeah.
Virginia VHW. I'm not allowed to say what the H stands for. But that's what we've been working on. And, to be honest, we're still selling a lot of that. We got a little bit of a following of it that, heck, it's 45% of what we sold in the last 6 months.
And it's $40. It's not going to break the bank.
Exactly. It wasn't the intention, right? It was kind of like this idea of like, okay, it's like, other people would sell clear spirits, right? We sold other people's blended with ours, right? It's just a way to kind of cut our own teeth. And we got a ton of learning out of it, right? I mean, the biggest thing that we learned was about blending. And, of course, blending has this, bad rap of like, oh, it's a blended Scotch. Like, no, we're talking about blending different barrels, right? That we own. And, to make some mistakes, have batch 4, which was nonsense, which went horribly wrong. And then it went horribly right. We blended it back into like the best batch we've ever had. We're now like batch 17. But, VHW, it was, the intention was just almost like a bridge, right? From like when we started to, hey, let's sell an American Single Malt. But, we learned a lot and we're still selling a lot of it. So people like it. And glad that we still have it on the market. And
I think I missed a step here. A bad hosting, because we've been having fun. So your dad gets hosting all this big stuff. I mean, he has the big cookers. He's got the big pots. He's got all that stuff.
Yeah.
You now have taken this over.
Mm-hmm.
What did you do? Who'd you call besides Ghostbusters? I mean, like,
that was the first call. It was Ghostbusters, and we had a long conversation. And like, I literally got to meet with Dan Aykroyd. He's like, I don't know how to tell you this.
he's like I have crystal vodka. I don't mess with whiskey.
Yeah, I know. That. By the way, that's always the threat for like the guys in the bottling line. Is like if they complain, like, okay, listen, here's the bottle we're moving to. Just a little inside production joke there. Yeah, so no, I mean, I had no idea what I was doing whatsoever. Not that I do now, but what we did is try to get smart people, specifically because of the scale, right? So Dad blessed us with a situation of having a big scale to the distillery. So it's a 10,000 liter system. You can do about 1 million LPA. That's about 250,000. 4.5 liter cases. We're doing about a third of that right now. It's a big system. It's not economically efficient to run it slow. And so, you can't say like, oh, give me half a batch, right? It's a batch system. You're going to make no less than, 6, 7, 8 casks at a time. And then if you're going to do that, you have to do 4, 5, 6 a week to make it economically efficient. So we're producing a huge amount. If you're going to be producing a huge amount and you're in a new style, in a new system, in a new climate that hasn't been done before, that's a hell of a risk. And I tend to be, I guess, like my father. My father was a big data and analytics guy. I tend to look at ways that we can kind of de-risk something, particularly at that scale, by getting a lot of input, getting a lot of outsiders that might know what they're doing better than we would. The first thing that we did was, as we were building out the system, we realized, hey, we're going to have some warehouses. Are we going to have dunnage warehouses like they would have in Scotland? Are we going to palletize them? The obvious answer to us was that we needed to have something that was at least have the upper and lower bounds of the climate, similar to Scotland. And in central Virginia, near where we are, there are a lot of wineries. We did a bunch of tours of nearby wineries for all these massive climate-controlled warehouses. And you need that for wine, right? It can't get too hot, can't get too humid, can't get too cold or dry. And maybe being a finance guy, the costs for that are massive, right? To have climate controlled warehouses. And it's like a huge like Costco or a Home Depot, right? I mean, the cost for those systems, let alone the operating costs year to year to keep them running, is huge. I to be honest, it was really the scale of it that was really intimidating. It's like, why are we going to be spending so much money on building these climate control systems? And there was a group that was doing very, very well at the time called Catalan out of Taiwan. As we were starting to launch the distillery, it's like, all right, these guys are doing it in a hot climate and they're embracing the climate. They're not trying to, have these climate controlled warehouses. And so we found the guy that was their consultant, Dr. Jim Swan. Big difference was that while they have very hot summers and pretty warm winters, we have hot summers and cold winters. And Dr. Swan came over to Virginia a few times and gave us his secret recipe, which wasn't that big of a secret. I can tell you exactly what it is. But, his big philosophy, and he told me this, I picked him up at Dulles Airport, driving from, Washington, D.C. area down to central Virginia. He told me everything we needed to know, like by the time we got to the site. But the big philosophy was, you have to embrace the local climate. If you were trying to make something that tasted like it was aged in Scotland, well, why didn't you build a distillery in Scotland, right? It was nonsense. I remember him being a little pissed off, like at the notion of like, okay, so you're going to be doing this where you have like these unique assets where it's humid. Is it humid, in Scotland, or even like the areas of Japan where they're aging stuff? Do you have these huge temperature shifts? What happens to wood when it gets very hot, when it gets very cold? It moves up and down. You're in the same country as bourbon climate. It's Central Virginia, not that far away. And so he was insulted by this idea that we were going to artificially create a maturation environment. And from there, he just kind of gave us the recipe of here's the distillate, here's the cask recipe. That's how we kind of took something that was large and risky and said, okay, we're going to follow a recipe that somebody that really knows what they're doing is going to guide us to the right direction. We're not going to try to reinvent the wheel. We're going to take best techniques and traditions from the old world and Dr. Swan and use his way to adjust them to the new world. And it's worked out for us.
So those very first barrels, was that something, I mean, I always laugh at the story about Garrison Brothers. I don't know if you've ever heard it with the heat, but when they first ran their still, they locked it in the rick house, put a lock on the door, locked it up, and said, we're not going to come back for 6 months, because they were afraid they would start drinking their own whiskey and all that fun stuff.
Plato, know thyself. Came
back in 6 months. All the whiskey had either leaked or evaporated because of the Texas heat. And so Dan had a breakdown, a whole bunch of stuff like depression of, we just wasted all this money that went in the, and then they had to go learn. They had to go talk to people and say, okay, what do you think we should do to keep the barrels, because it's so hot that the wood was expanding so much, it was just causing everything to leak out. The barrels weren't staying together. So they had to do a whole lot of work and figure it out to embrace that Texas heat, which is essentially the same thing that he was telling, Dr. Swan was telling you. But I almost wonder, did he say like, yeah, you're going to have to keep a couple barrels aside in the beginning and taste them constantly to see how this whiskey changes month to month, and then at a certain point, week to week?
Yeah, so I'll tell you what, our marketing folks will be all pissy at me, but and tell them that pissy at me. But I said earlier, my dad was a big data guy, and I tend to be very data driven and analytics driven, and I like to say I take the fun out of whiskey in terms of the production. Is starting with Dr. Swan, we did twice a week. We would get spectral chromatography, and we would get these different analysis of the distillate straight off the stills, and there would be 37 metrics that we get starting twice a week. Then we did it every other week, and now we do it like once a month. It shows you, okay, here's exactly what's coming off the stills. Here's the different esters. Here's the different compounds that are coming off. And rather than, I guess, having a feel for it, we were really trying to do something where we were following a very exact recipe. And it was interesting that, one of the first times, maybe the second or third time I talked to Dr. Swan, I remember I was at my father-in-law's house. It was around Christmas, and my father-in-law is involved with business. I was heading to the airport later that afternoon, but he and I spoke with Dr. Swan, and my father-in-law asked a really good question. He said, well, you're giving us all these recipes and we're going through this production. How are we going to know every day, right, that like we're making the right distillate that's going to, thrive in this climate if we don't have an expert like you at the end of the stills every day? And he had this really interesting kind of anecdote, metaphor, whatever the right word is. He said, well, Gareth said he's going to the airport later this afternoon. Gareth is going to know he's at the airport when he gets there and he sees airplanes on the ground and people, getting out of cars and kissing their wives and so on. He knows he's at the airport. Wouldn't he also know he's at the airport if he, took a left out of the driveway, took a right on the main road and went north of the interstate and then followed the exits for the airport? If he followed all the steps on the way, well, he doesn't have to see the airplanes to believe he's at the airport, right? If he got there and there was no airplanes, he'd be shocked because he followed every step of the way. And so if you kind of follow the right steps of exactly how you're going to get your mash going, what your fermentation is going to look like, what your different temperatures, what your different cuts are going to look like, what your cask recipe is, then, it's kind of funny. It was all a matter of faith on the front end, but now it's not a matter of faith. You go into any cask, I can tell you, with the exception of a few lines in Microsoft Excel, what the quality is going to be, because we follow that exact recipe. We keep these standards, and we got this fabulous rating of 98 points for a single cask, and it's like, great, that's a single cask. I can give you the numbers of exactly what the distillate that went in there was, exactly what the temperatures were that it aged in, and I can give you a ton of other single casks just like that. Now, of course, the marketing people are going to be all pissy at me right now because they take all the fun out of it. But that's how we do it. It does take the fun out of it in some way. It takes the romance out of it, but it literally is how we run the business. And I'm proud of it now because, I mean, just think about like the years and years and years of distillate that we've been putting in barrels. And, we could hope and pray and go to, church twice on Sundays to hope that it tastes good one day. But Instead, we're trying to follow a recipe to get out there on the other side. It worked. And the thing that I'm really happy is it worked, and I know it worked at scale because we don't just have these barrels that are like, amazing honey barrels. A honey barrel, I can go to Microsoft Excel and I can show you where all the honey barrels are. We got a bunch of them because we're very consistent. Sorry, Andrew. Sorry, Amanda. Sorry, Jessica. Those are the brand people.
So Andrew, Amanda, Jessica, I'm about to save it for you. As someone who was an Excel trainer and geeks out over spreadsheets myself, I work in technology. I think you have to run your business that way. I think if you go to any of these places in Kentucky, they're running their business that way. They're not like Bardstown Bourbon Company is not leaning against the fact that they are a very automated, they have computers, you go there, it's out in the open, you can see it. So like for your marketing team, I don't think you have to worry about it with that. I think your marketing team also has everything they need with a son carrying on his father's legacy. Like, number one, good on you for finishing his dream, but two, like, doesn't hurt the brand that you continued his dream. With all due respect, I hope you don't take that the wrong way.
And to do it in the way. No, I appreciate what you're saying, right? Because we could blow smoke up people's asses and be like, ooh, and we stand at the bottom of the stills and taste it. No, Dad wouldn't have done that. I mean, the stills weren't running when Dad was alive. Dad, maybe you do it for a camera, right? And maybe you might find me do it for a camera, right? But in reality, it's that we try to figure out what are we going to make and how are we going to make it, and let's do it at scale, and let's try to make it good, not because we're going to guess and throw a bunch of darts at the wall, but because we think we have a recipe, we believe in it, and it worked.
And also, when it comes to these bigger distilleries, once you get to like a Jim Beam or you get to a Jack Daniels, like they need to make Jack Daniels every single time. And if you think that there is not a level of precision to make Jack Daniels every single time, like I got a bridge in Brooklyn I'd love to sell you. So I don't think anybody is running away from that. It's also just making sure that you have the ability to still do your experimental stuff. Like that's where you're not taking the readings yet. I mean, well, let's be honest, you're still taking them in case you decide to do it again. So you have some stuff to compare it to. But
I mean, if you want to guess like the name of the file in Excel of like the experiments, here's the thing about experiments. If you're going to have an experiment that goes right, guess what? You're going to have a ton that goes wrong. And so I don't know if I gave you the cast recipe yet. It's hopefully you're not recording. We say them towards on the website. It's 25% sherry, 25% SDR. That's the shaved toast repair wine casks, and then 50% bourbon. That's not exactly what it is because we do 1% of just experimental casks, right? So we do about 1,200, 1,400 casks a year. So it's still a good number of 12, 14 casks that are just weird. Of those weird ones, the reality is that most of them are going to be gross, right? You got to take a risk, right? And so it's like, how about brandy? Like all the different types of brandy, they're like inert. It doesn't do anything. We have tons of those with like, keep it in the back there. It's going to get good one day.
Peach brandy is great, by the way. I think that's a very underrated blender.
Well, it's a random thing, but unfortunately none of ours were peach. But like, we get sold like these 8 different types of rum casks, and there's a few, and I'm not going to mention them by name, that like turn out fabulously. There's others where it's like, oh my God, why did we ever can we just throw it away? No, you don't throw it away. Just leave it in the warehouse. We should throw it away. It is gross. I think it's poison. But yeah, I mean, you're gonna have things that turn out funky that way. So I mean, with the experimental stuff, I mean, my big thought is that you really have to invest maybe 10 barrels, and maybe we'll get 2 barrels that are pretty good. And the other ones are interesting for the sake of being interesting, which I'm not a big fan of, right? It's like, ooh, taste this. How is it? No. Taste this. No, but how do you feel about it? Ooh, you tell me. Taste it.
I don't want to influence you. You should taste it and then tell me what you think.
Yeah.
As I'm thinking about this, though, like there are those weird ones, and just hear me out, like Stranahan Snowflake. is a whole bunch of weird barrels that when you put them together end up being really good. So I almost think like it's keep it in the back because on its own, but like we put it with a tequila finish and we put it with some other stuff.
It might go into this delicious, pie at one point.
Yeah.
And that's what's also beautiful about like things like that, like a Solera. Like I was throwing out there way back that we had BHW batch 4, and it was like this crazy Frankenstein thing that got horrible, and it got horrible in a way of like, oh my God, we don't have product. The color went funny. It got all pink on us. And, we just had weird things that went in. We were working with a bottler that did a weird filtration on us. And then we kept adding things and got worse. And then we added other things and got better. And then we kept doing more and more stuff. And it just turned into this Frankenstein. To this day, it's my favorite batch. It just had this really nice, like creamy kind of texture of, I don't want to say that it was just, so much stuff that it kind of blended together into nothing, but it just finally worked. And we didn't think it was going to work. I mean, I thought it was like, oh my God, we just have to make this not poison people. And then it turned into one of our best, right?
As long as your cuts are good, you're not going to poison anyone. That's the beautiful thing.
Yeah. And you know what? I have that written in like a beautiful neon sign above my bed. And my wife hates it, but damn it, that quote is what we keep.
I love, by the way, just a side note. So you probably are not like listening to Dad's Drinking Bourbon all the time, and that's okay. But your sense of humor is right in line with mine. So we had Tim Heisler on from Jim Beam, and he had just seen Rage Against the Machine. And so I low-key deadpan put in 27 Rage Against the Machine song titles into the normal conversation. It took me a whole lot to edit because Tim was cracking up after every single one of them. But like I would be like, Freddie No at Jim Beam is calm like a bomb. His dad has his distillery. He has his now. He has freedom. There's no shelter. He could go do whatever he wants. I mean, like, I love that just deadpan dad joke tone. And I just have to tell you how much I appreciate it.
I appreciate it too. Our cellar master, a guy named Brian Hersey, he's an amazing guy. He is a huge Rage Against the Machine fan. And it's just so awkward because, like, I've told him many times, like, I identify like as the Machine. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like I'm the man, right? And
but like, you have, your beard does not make you look like the man. Like, your beard makes you look like you're ready.
No. This is a little baby beard. No. You should see, like, Brian's beard is like, and so it's great fun. Anytime I hear him with a song like that, it's like, that's offensive to me and my people who are part of the Machine.
The people that are doing pivot tables up in
yeah. If you like Microsoft Excel, if you feel the way about blending tanks that Brian does, then you feel the way about like a pivot table that I do. And that makes me part of the Machine.
Anyways.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know if you know this, but undergrad I was comp sci, and then I've been an Excel monkey most of my life. I enjoy it. I love it. And by day I'm a finance guy. I do Excel just, better than I make whiskey, I suppose. I don't actually make whiskey. The other guys make whiskey.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, because you have this distillery. So in the beginning, but while you were getting the people in, did you have to go in and get your hands dirty? Did you try it?
Yeah, no, I did. And so, you're asking earlier about like different influencers, or not in the new sense, but in people that kind of helped us get us going. So Dr. Swan was the guy behind the recipe. He was a big maturation expert, but in terms of the engineering of actually building the distillery, that's really important on the front end. So a guy that had worked with Dr. Swan for many years named Harry Coburn. Harry was the production manager of all Morrison Thomer distilleries at the height of his career. He retired in 1994, and he is just dog shit at retiring, given that he's still working today, right? I tell him that every time. He's 86 years of age, and he came and was a big part of just the design work of the distillery. And then once it got started, he was there with Dr. Swan a few times. I was there with him the first time we did a double shift, meaning we just did, back-to-back distillations. I like to tell it, the story to all the distillers on the team is that nobody on the team has the level of accreditation that I have from world-renowned distiller like Harry Coburn, who's gone from, 45 years in distilling, lived in Iowa for 27 years. And he took me aside and told me, after 2 different shifts, I mean, nobody has anything like this on our team, that, Gareth, you are not cut out for this. This is not for you. You should probably not do this. I took his advice and I haven't touched the stuff since. And so that was in late 15, maybe early 16. You like to take the advice of experts. And if 80-odd-year-old distiller says you should never touch these things again, then you do what he says. And the whiskey is better for it.
So that brings up a great point. Let's actually talk about this whiskey, this Courage and Conviction. There are 3 different types. You could tell me all about them. There's a bourbon cask, a sherry cask, and a cuvee cask.
Yeah, so they approximate the 3 main ingredients of what we put in our flagship, but that's just effectively what we have in the warehouse, right? So when we're making our distillate's all the same. Put in those 3 different types of casks: 50% bourbon, 25% sherry, and then 25% what we call cuvee. They're a Dr. Swan specialty, shave, toast, and rechar cask, STR. But if you just put STR in a bottle, people don't really know what you're talking about. So we had to come up with a fancy name like cuvee. I don't know. I mean, if you had a better name, we'll go with it, man. Cuvee sounded pretty good, right? Better than STR.
You could call it the Swan cask.
Ooh. So, do we have to pay you if we start calling it the Swan cask?
You can just call it the Swan. I absolve myself of all. All
right. So it's 25% of the Swan Edwards casks, and we that's what I'm drinking right now, and it's it's my favorite. It's kind of the special sauce. It's I only know of 1 or 2 distilleries that have ever used them that aren't part of the Dr. Swan cabal. The cabal of Dr. Swan distilleries includes Kavalan, Taiwan, Milk and Honey in Tel Aviv. Let's see, you have Kilchoman, you have Penderin, and Cotswolds, the big ones he worked with, including ourselves.
Just a side note, but Kavalan there was a distro pick here in Nashville, and it was called Tyrannosaurus Rex, and it was one of the best whiskeys. I mean, this happened it was pre-pandemic, and everybody was like, oh shit, you try this T-Rex? And they're like, this stuff is... it's Kavalan. It's not. It was good. There is some great stuff coming from there. But sorry, I cut you off just to talk about that. But I still remember that all the time. There's some.
No, we love those guys, and learned a lot from them. And candidly, we kind of walk in their footsteps in terms of the distillate and the cask style and everything. But yeah, those are the 3 main types: bourbon, sherry, and cuvee. Cuvee being the kind of interesting one. Of the sherry, it's split into, much like the opening lines of Julius Caesar, in 3 parts. God damn it. I don't know why I nerded out on that. So Oloroso, PX, and Fino. PX stands for Pedro Jimenez. Do you know what Pedro in Spanish means? Well, but it's the Spanish equivalent of what English name, Pedro.
Peter.
That's right. And so that's exactly where we get our peated casks. That's where Isla gets their peated cask, is from Pedro Jimenez, Pete Jimenez.
Interesting.
No, that was bullshit. But imagine if it was.
I mean, do you know what San Diego stands for?
It's the same vein. Yeah, exactly.
I do love that you sent the little pack here, and I told you this. We were gonna go, and I realize it's 11:30 your time now, but I love how you sent this out. I've had Courage and Conviction before, the blend, everything put together, but I haven't had the component parts. So when your team reached out and they go, well, do you want the full bottle or do you want the component parts? I'm like, I'm kind of really interested. I like blending. I like the science of blending. I don't think blending... I think if 7-8 years ago, blending still had a negative connotation, and I feel like it's like that has made this switch. And there's so many enthusiasts that want to blend, and we're getting into now the science of blending on the bourbon side. The malt side has always been into blending. Everywhere in the rest of the world, blending is not a taboo word. It is just what you do when you mingle barrels together. But I find this bourbon cask, almost on its own is like a beer. Like it is very much like an IPA. Like it's not too over the top in its taste, but component on its own. Like, and if you're thinking, okay, where is the 50%? Where is the bulk of this blend going to be? It's going to be the least, and this isn't a bad way of saying it. It's the least offensive of
the baseline.
Yeah.
Yeah, the baseline, the backbone. You know what's so interesting is like just over the years thinking about like the anticipation of, all right, everybody's going to be drinking these casks, and like here's what people are going to like, because obviously people are going to like exactly what I like, which is not true. But then it's like when people like are going to be giving you their opinion on the 3 different casks, you can't like all of them. Right. And you can't like if you like all of them, you're not going to like them all equally. Right. And so it's like your kids, where it's like, well, you know, I'm personally, I happen to be huge on the cuvee, the STRs. That's awesome. Within the sherries, there's some different things. And the bourbons, like to me, tend to be kind of like, okay, that's the base. That's it. And then it turns out simply on the sales numbers, people like the bourbon. And it's like, well, dummies, like, you know, we do more exciting stuff. But that's like saying like, you know, to like the kindergarten teacher, it's like, well, I got a second grader too, you know, because I do have a kindergartner, and the kindergartner is awesome. The second grader, I'll take it or leave it.
It's funny here. It is funny here though, because if bourbon is the base, the sherry is the outlier. Right? The sherry is the one that's punching you in the face.
Yeah.
The flavor is just super, super bold. And I would say I could see why you would like the cuvee, because the cuvee is in the middle. Like it's still got some boldness to it, but it's not like, I feel like sherry is like those old cartoons where it's like the guy's holding him by the neck and he's just slapping him across the face back and forth.
Yeah.
That's what I get with this sherry. It's just super, super bold. And I mean, I wish I had 3 hours with you, because, and I've talked about this again for those of you listening. We've talked about this on the podcast before. American whiskey, like bourbons and rye. I'm not talking about American single malt, but just American whiskey in general. They go finish in sherry, and it's like, hey, I have this PX sherry, or I have Oloroso sherry, and I'm finishing in wine casks. Why am I doing that? Because that's what Scotch did. And I almost feel like the corn and the rye mixed together with the barley, like it just 9 times out of 10, I have yet to find a wine finished American whiskey that I'm like, woohoo, because I feel like that with the sweetness of bourbon and the dryness of wine, like some of these things don't go together, but 100% barley and wine.
It works out. Yeah. Well, you know, what's an interesting thing is just thinking about like exactly what you said about bourbons. Well, Angel's Envy works really nicely because it's a port wine finish, right? Where you got that sugary sweet port there, right? It's
the dessert wine.
Bourbon. Yeah. Yeah. Which is a delicious drink. But yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, with malt whiskey, you're having a lot more of the grain come through, right? So like bourbon, it has to interact with new wood that turns it into delicious bourbon. You're not getting that corn right on the front end the same way you would with the single malt, or any malted barley, where you're getting that grain really screaming through to the end. And so trying to avoid getting too much wood on the front end. But on the other hand, that's why I also do like the cuvee. It's not new wood, but it is kind of, right? So like, you know, shaving it and then, you know, toasting it, and there's a char to it. If there's a char that's happening on top, we're kind of, I don't know, it sounds like we're trying to just be cheap about the matter of like refreshing oak. But it is kind of interesting how it ends up a little more in the middle of like an American whiskey and a Scottish whiskey, where, you know, suddenly we do have some of those darker, and the color comes through a lot more, you know, it looks closer to a bourbon, and we get a lot more of those, you know, sweeter notes out of the wood than you would out of, you know, traditional Scottish single malt.
For people that are listening, I mean, nobody is trying to cut corners by getting used barrels. I mean, that's just, if that is the parameter that you're given, you go for the parameter that's given. How many uses do you get out of your barrels before they kind of, it's time for them to go?
Yeah, so we try not to cut corners on the barrels. What we do is we spell whiskey without an E because the labelers they charge you by the letter, right? And so if you drop the E, it's a bit cheaper.
As long as you don't use those damn parentheses, I'm okay. Like I'm just
I know.
my one pet peeve in whiskey is where you have the WHISK and then the E's in the parentheses.
Whiskey. yeah, exactly. So we dropped the E, and I can give you an email where it has 3 exclamation points of you're going to charge us this, and we're dropping the E, but it is cheaper for the labels. But you don't cheap out on the casks. So we remember I was mentioning that experimental zone. We've done second fills in those. They are not working. So by second fills, I mean used barrels, right? So terminology, we use FB1s would be the first time we're filling them, FB2, FB3, and then same on STRs. And so we have a collection of barrels that we dumped. We only started dumping in 2019, so it hasn't been that long. And when you look at how they're developing over time, they are not developing very well. And so, I mean, what that really tells us is that we're really getting all of everything that the barrel has to give on the first go around. And so if we're trying to do it again, it's not an economic endeavor at that point. We've already gotten it all spent. The way I always like to explain it is this never works for people in the UK because they don't have back decks, right? But in Kentucky, I imagine Tennessee, you have a back deck. I have a back deck here. You see the expansion and contraction during the winter and the summer. Same thing happening in a cask. You do that a few times with a used cask, there's just nothing left in the wood for a second use.
I almost wonder if it has to do with the climate too, because if you the Scotch folks, they can reuse the barrel, and it's also colder, so the heat is not pushing the whiskey into that.
Yeah.
So
it just hasn't gotten the workout.
It hasn't, and so the barrels aren't doing as much, so you can use it 2-3 times because the juice is not going into the wood like it would here. So maybe that is something it's almost like if you did keep one in an air-conditioned room, a cheap way of doing climate control. It's we're going to put one barrel
preservation,
in an air-conditioned room for 6 months, opposed to out on the floor for 6 months. We're going to see what happens.
Yeah, but then I mean, here comes to the controversial thing with American Single Malts is why don't we have these massive age statements? Like a standard being 12 years or 18 years. On the one side, you could say, well, obviously it's a very nascent industry, but it's also because they don't really improve after a certain amount of time, and you've already had a huge amount of evaporation. And so, I mean, it's not terribly dissimilar to bourbon. Once we get to 6, 7, 8 years, we're not really getting good maturation, right? Yeah, we can sit around and put an age statement on a bottle, but we're not really getting huge quality gains out of waiting much longer in Scotland where you would.
I mean, I agree with you 100%. And there's so many people that love MGP and go for MGP. And I always have a lot of questions. And this is when you get to a certain point in your whiskey journey, I know too much where I could be an idiot and I could be somewhat dangerous at the same time. And it's knowing MGP, knowing it's a cement rickhouse, the proof goes down at MGP when it ages there. But also I also know that 11 years are probably my peak for MGP. Once it gets over 11 years, I think it's too oaky, personally.
Yeah.
But I also then have the question, I've had a 14-year MGP that was aged at Traverse City in Michigan that was really good because it was cold weather, it was in that cold weather climate, and it wasn't in Nashville or Kentucky or even Indiana where you're going to have that really, really, really hot summer and the really cold winter. So where was it distilled? Where was it aged? Has a big part of it. How long did you age it in that climate? And I think that's where, so for Americans that kind of look at a whiskey and go, older is better. It's well, there's a lot of factors that go into that.
Right. And I am optimistic that that's slowly kind of going away, right? We've gone through the phase of consumers getting, enough to be dangerous, right? Of higher age is better. And I'm hopeful that we're kind of going through that phase into, well, no, better is better, right? Regardless of what the age is. And that's happening a little bit naturally as the Scots are, all their massive age statements are going over to Asia. and they're outpricing them in the Western world. And you have people like Bruichladdich, which are kind of taking it head on, saying, hey, we're getting rid of these age statements because we're going to put older ages and younger ages together. The law says that we can only do the youngest age. And we're just going to tell you right now, there's going to be a bunch of 17, 18, and some 6, 7 year, and we can't put an age statement on it. So, I'm hopeful that it's going to the consumer kind of thinking about a more nuanced approach to understanding age.
Well, and that's what, like Wild Turkey Rare Breed recently had some 16-year stuff in it. You don't see a lot of Four Roses that are 20 years old. I know there were some charity ones that recently just came out, but you could have 15 to 20-year-old Four Roses in the artist formerly known as Yellow Label, which is now the Nude Label bottle that is under $20. But these distilleries need a place, and eventually you're going to be there. Your production is too high. You need a dumping ground. And it's not saying it in a bad way, but it's like...
We call that a blending in ground,
not
a dumping ground.
But,
but I know exactly what you're saying. Yeah, exactly.
It's like, we have this whiskey. We don't want to lose it. It's worth money to us. We have to put it somewhere. Oh, we can blend it out in this Courage and Conviction.
Yeah.
But unless you have, if age statements are there.
Maybe it needs something much younger that's going to make a lovely balance to it. And, you're going to have two things that maybe independently aren't going to be that awesome, but together are going to be unbelievable. But if you go to the age statement world, it's like, well, we should probably have two crummy things. And one of them is going to have a massive price on it because it has a huge age statement on it.
I get it. What else is in store? And this is great. I love the fact that I got to taste the components this time. I've had Courage and Conviction before. It is very famous on Dad's Drinking Bourbon that I'm the one who will enjoy Scotch and single malts and Irish whiskey. And
there we go.
So whenever those things come in, Zeke just goes like, Edwards, I'm going to trust you on this one. I'm a fan of Courage and Conviction, and I'm not just saying that because Gareth is on. You've heard me say that on shows before, y'all.
I appreciate that. Absolutely.
What else is coming down the line for Virginia Distillery? What can we look forward to? Anything new, or just kind of stay the course and get bigger?
No. We have some new stuff out there, and it's just what I was talking about earlier with the experimental lines. The good and bad of it is that you find these like awesome casks, but you can't do a lot of them because if you did a lot of them, imagine if they didn't turn out well. So we have some really cool stuff. We have the Spanish oak sherry that we're looking at for next year. We might do it the year after that. We're back and forth between that and some Tio Pepe sherry. We have Madeira casks. We have Marsala casks. And then the rums, we have some rums that aren't working. We have some awesome rums. We're trying to take it a little slow. We only started 2 years ago with C&C, Courage and Conviction. So there's some of us internally that are just very excited to get everything out to market as soon as we can. But others of us who say, well, the distributors want us to be slow about it. Don't tell the distributors that. We got some cool stuff that's coming out. And if you come to the distillery, we'll show you some of the stuff that sounds interesting, that doesn't taste good. And if you're in the market, we'll only send the stuff that actually tastes good.
I think that the fun thing, I really love the model that Chattanooga Whiskey does, where they have their experimental distillery, but then everything they're doing is just a distillery only release with the experimental stuff. So it's like, all right, we did this. If you want it, come to the distillery and get it. And then that way you're taking distro out of it. But then the same time is if somebody decides they have this expression and it gets so much good feedback, it's like, all right, well, maybe we got to put some more of that down.
Yeah, exactly. And then wait a hell of a long time for it to age too. So that's the hard part about those experiments, right? If they work, it's like, we should have put more down. If they don't work, we shouldn't have put so much down.
Exactly. But at least you could say you did it and you have a pipeline to it in the future. It's better to have that prediction.
How about this? The marketing people already hate me, but imagine
they love you.
What if any distiller, they do, of course, because I will fire them. No, that's not why. No, I don't want them to fear me. I want them to be afraid of how much they love me, Michael Scott.
Yes. But, would I rather be feared or loved? Both. I want people to fear how much they love me.
But all right, how about, I'm just thinking of this on the spot here. How about this? What if any given distillery, took their experimental lines and then they found like the delicious bottles, and they're like, here's what we're going to sell. And then they also went with like all the shitty things that like they tried and failed, and then like put those like alongside of it and be like, listen, we had to make all these shitty products so that this awesome product came out. Right? It would give people appreciation.
But
right?
no, I've had this conversation.
Because that's how it works.
I had this conversation literally this week with someone, and it was, we don't see all the times that somebody fails. So you wonder why like whiskey people get entitled for things and they have this attitude. It's like, you don't see they tried 100 things and all these 100 things sucked.
All the horrible things, right? Yeah. Imagine that like a tasting. I mean, I always have to go through the regulatory stuff. It's like you can just bring everything out of the warehouse. But that would be awesome to have a tasting which says, hey, here are these 12 weirdo barrels that we tried. And we have one of them that's unbelievable. Now you're going to have to drink the other 11.
Well, there is famously, and it's not there anymore. I think they finally ran out of it. Bad bourbon on the Heaven Hill tour. And so you would do the Heaven Hill tasting tour. And so Parker, he would only nose. He wouldn't taste the whiskey. So he'd do everything off of nosing. And it was this 24-year-old whiskey. It was at a high floor in the Rick, and it smells great. I mean, you put it in your glass, you smell it, you're like, this nose is phenomenal. You taste it, and you're like, this is the shittiest whiskey I've ever had in my whole entire life. And
I wish I was never born.
It was so hot and burnt and just, it was awful. And he never had it because he didn't taste it. He just nosed it and just thought like, this is going to be a great barrel, set it aside. And it's on the tour for being bad bourbon because once the tasters got involved, they were like, yeah, Parker, this sucks.
Yeah. Once the rubber hits the road, right?
But I do think it would be fun to have an experimental tour. Like, so distilleries, take notice if you're listening. I think it would be a really cool tour to be like, do you want to try, like, not all of the whiskey is going to be good. And we don't want you to come away thinking everything is good, but we want you to find the journey to how we got to this release.
Yeah, exactly. There's a private equity firm, a venture capital firm called Bessemer Ventures, and they have something they call the anti-portfolio, which is all of the places that they had the opportunity to invest where they failed. Not they failed, but they turned down the investment for one way or another, and it includes things like Google and Facebook and YouTube and all this sort of thing. It's interesting because it's humble that they put that out there. Of like, hey, we've done a great job, but here are the things that we failed at. And I think that would be great for a distillery to do that because it really shows everybody that, you know, you in order to get something good, you have to fuck up a bunch of times.
Yeah. I appreciate that. I also appreciate you. I can't wait to have you on again. You know, we're going to have to check in and see where the progress is. Right now, I'm going to let you go to bed.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
You have a day of work tomorrow. It's almost midnight, but folks can find you at vadistillery.com. It is a family affair over there. Right on the leadership page, you got your mom and you and your wife, like everybody together. So would love that it is a family affair over at Virginia Distillery. Make sure to check out Courage and Conviction. Make sure to check out the VHW. Anything else you want me to tell the people?
No, just thank you, John, for everything you do and for getting the good word out to the people.
Awesome. Go ahead and find us on Facebook at Dad's Drinking Bourbon, Twitter at Bourbon Dads, Instagram at Dad's Drinking Bourbon. Please leave us an open and honest review, just like we leave open and honest reviews about the whiskey we drink. Zeke, where else can the folks find us? Good old Nashville, Tennessee. Cheers. Ciao. Thanks, buddy. It was a pleasure.
All right. That was good times, man.